Good morning, good morning. Welcome to a special geopolitical meditations. I just gotta begin by giving a shout out a rock and roll song for NASA's Artemis. Thank you, NASA, for naming the project after a goddess. Because at the table here, it's the god and the goddess, and always 24/7 I rock and roll for the firefighters, the butchers, the bakers, the nurses, the doctors, the plumbers, the electricians, the daycare workers changing diapers, and was a bit moody last night, moody this morning, but I feel much better now. Gonna have some cup of coffee, and I'm gonna introduce the emergency geopolitical morning and, of course, analysis on the current conflict in Iran, the Iranian conflict, and of course, it's been a month since the Iranian conflict commenced. So again, shout out and salutations. Gonna sing that rock and roll, do a dance in the coming days for NASA's Artemis lunar exploration project. And it's always math with yours truly, but I would wish to discuss more in-depth mathematics, everything that has to do with math and science around the launch, because I'm no Claude Shannon, but I do math, percentages and distance and velocity. There's always some types of mathematics going on in my brain at any given time. So here I just want to focus on geopolitics. Specifically, it's not going to be a long video, but it's going to be a brief introduction to my analysis of the current Iranian conflict, Israel's and United States joint Israel Operation Roaring Lion and United States Operation Epic Fury. So, from my analysis, from all the information that we have, and of course, it's an ongoing conflict, I'm going to analyze it from a North American football perspective, from a National Football League perspective, CFL, gridiron, from a gridiron perspective, a North American football. So, I'm actually going to see if I can take the football from here just to make the analysis more explicit, and maybe it will help me underscore the realities of what I'm discussing. So again, I want to commence, although I'm financially stressed, I want to commence that I'm always open for business. And if you're 18 plus, you have to be 18 plus for that play, black or white or man or woman. I'm part of the LGBTQ community and the neurodivergent community. I'm always open for friends with benefits. I don't want to waste anybody's time. And I'm going to probably take a bath today because gotta take one because I can't afford a massage therapy session. But anyway, I'm always working independently and always on a daily basis. I have my ritual routines because I do have ASD level 1 autism spectrum disorder. So I'm an Aspie. I have Asperger's and HFA. So certain things have been more difficult all over the years, especially thanks to my anonymous friend for giving me some books, a certain book specifically, this book which I recommend for people with Asperger's. But the first book that I recommend, I don't have it because that was a loan from a library. It's called Appreciating Asperger's Syndrome. Appreciating Asperger's Syndrome. But this one, Teaching Asperger's Students Social Skills Through Acting All Their World as a Stage, is a book that I also recommend in parallel to the aforementioned. So I do have a special interest, plural, but and geopolitics is my special interest, has been for many, many years. And of course, I work as an independent geopolitical theoretical analyst, theorist, philosopher, and strategist. And I actually predicted what's happening now back in 2019. I do have the proof for what I just said. I did predict what's happening now. Back in 2019, in October, I predicted that there will be an international conflagration, and in many ways, it's happening as I had predicted it back then. So now I'm gonna put the current conflict into perspective, and I'm just gonna introduce my analysis from a. It's an introduction. It's not an unlength one because I'm gonna have to do follow-ups. So this is just the introduction to this series of lectures that I'm launching now as I celebrate. It's the last day of March, and of course, as I survived COVID 6 years ago. 6 years ago, right here, I had COVID, and I think I had a lot of at least three symptoms over the past 2 weeks of the current COVID mutation variant, the COVID variant, the cicada variant. I had the flu-like symptoms. I fought it off. Even this morning, I had a little bit of sore throat. I wasn't coughing this much this morning, just a little bit. I kind of stopped about 2 hours ago. No more coughing since, but I guess I've been maybe dealing with the COVID variant over the past in last week and this weekend and even yesterday. I went to do laundry. Today I postponed laundry because I was supposed to do laundry, but it's raining here. It was raining hard, so I said, so I have to walk and come back and walk there and come back, and so it's been. I'm gonna delay it probably to do it Thursday or Friday in between. So now what we are gonna discuss is the Iranian conflict from a perspective that might be unique, and of course in a geopolitical way with the realities or the events that happen in football. So over the past weeks, it seems that there has been, if I can parallel it with North American football gridiron, there has been a fumble recovery, right? So if you know a little bit about football, American football, there's two teams, 11 players versus 11, and there's, of course, you have to advance to score the touchdown into the adversary territory. So you have to gain territory to gain yards, right? You gain yard by yard, sometimes 5 yards, 3.5 yards, 7 yards, 11 yards. Then you get the first down, then you might stop the clock. And of course, there's lots of rules to football. But one of the events that can happen in football is a fumble, right? So, for example, if I would be the quarterback and I would pass the ball, or I would pass the ball for a runner, for a running back to run, gain some yards, and that running back, before it reaches the ground with the knees on the ball, if the ball snaps out, it can be recovered by an adversarial defensive player, right? So that's a fumble recovery, and that defensive player can even run until he is tackled, until he's tackled for to be stopped. So that means that he could go all the way to score a touchdown, right? So this could mean that if a game is a 4, 6 point, or 5 points, or 4 points, or 3 points, or 2 points, or 1 point difference, that could be that if there's not enough time, a fumble recovery can mean that the adversarial team, paradoxically, can win the game if they go all the way in time. If there's not enough time on the clock and so on, of course, these are circumstances, but generally the fumble happens in many ways. It could be, or it could be a pass interception. But in this case, I'm not gonna put it as a interception and running in the opposite direction by the defensive player. So paradoxically, also the defensive player, or supposed to defend the territory, right? In football, in gridiron football, becomes an offensive player. But because if it recovers the football, if it's a fumble recovery, then the player will run. Whoever that player is will run to gain yards. He could gain 5 yards, 10 yards, 50 yards, 44 yards, or go all the way to score a touchdown. There has been cases where a fumble recovery gives way to a touchdown, to a TD, right? So, from my analysis, if I can, of what's happening geopolitically of the Iran conflict, Iran war, is that this has been the case, that it's parallel to a fumble recovery by Iran, right? By Iran. And specifically due to perhaps not, perhaps underestimated, perhaps not accounted for, perhaps not too valued, perhaps disconsidered, perhaps not taken too seriously into this military strategy before the Operation Epic Fury and Operation Roaring Lion began. But Iran built an underground base. Supposedly, they have several underground bases, of which they're not really just bases, they're like massive cities, especially Eagle 44, which houses supposedly tens of thousands of missiles and planes and rockets, and maybe even they can house thousands of soldiers, tens of thousands of soldiers for a few years, for a prolonged conflict if they stack food there. It's immense. They opened it in 2023, and supposedly they have several. Not that big. Eagle 44, check it out, Google it, and get the information that you can. Eagle 44 is, of course, to celebrate the 44th anniversary of the successful Iranian Revolution. Since 11th of February 1979, 11th of February 1979 was when Iran, the current Iranian theocratic regime, the Islamic Republic, took power, right? 11th of February 1979. So in 2023, they had opened that base base 44, but it's an underground and it's in the mountain, and it seems that from above, from the planes, the bombardments from atop from the planes cannot really pierce and cannot really damage it because it's, like I said, underground. So that might be a problem. That might be a problem that was not really accounted for. And it seems that due to that, specifically due to that base 44, Iran is able has able to, by their attacks they have been doing in the past 2 weeks, especially in the past 2 weeks, especially, is like a fumble recovery, right? If the player runs to get yards to score the touchdown or to gain some yards in the territory, in this case, the defensive player was Iran, right? Because Iran, well, whatever, they call it a surprise attack, and the Israeli military and Israeli leadership and Israeli politicians and the United States politician, it was deemed as a preemptive strike. Now, I'm not going to discuss the in-depth origins of preemptive strike. It has its roots, of course, after 9/11, specifically with Donald Rumsfeld, and it's rooted in what's generally termed the the neoconservative movement in the United States, especially the ones that were, of course, in the Bush administration, the post 9/11 era, right? The invasion of Iraq as well. Iraq in 2003, March 20th, I believe, it was considered a preemptive strike. So it was a military strategical doctrine, if you will, and it's mainly neoconservative or neocons who were advocating for it, who formulated it, who created it. Now, I'm not going to discuss that in depth, preemptive strike, if you will, to commission, because I'll definitely need some work in commissioning. Then I could do an in-depth analysis of the preemptive strike, again, from a North American perspective, right? Because my ideas, theories, and philosophies, as you know, are for total SSD, security, service, and defense, coast to coast, ocean to ocean, internally, right, in Canada, United States, because as much as I know the conflicts, these histories, the civilizations, the 20th century Cold War period, and going back to ancient history, as myself, I'm a mystic. I do believe in reincarnation. Sometimes I was born a man or woman throughout the centuries, the millennia from ancient Egypt until now. But and but that is what's been happening, or in many ways has been happening in the protrudent, the conflict that's been happening now since February 28th. So again, if you think about it, in football, so to parallel the fumble, the event, right? The event in football, there's many events, but one of the possible events in North American gridiron in football, CFL, even Canadian football, because I say North American because fundamentally I'm a Quebecer, Canadian, North American. Is even I haven't left the island of Montreal in many years. Last time I really got out was 2017, so that's more than 8 years ago, summer 2017, when I crossed Canada coast to coast. So pretty much I've been living on this island, most of my life on the island of the Hawk Island, Montreal, Hawk, HAWK, So this is pretty much my personal experiences with my personal struggles with autism and losing friends and regular unemployment or irregular employment, because I like to work. I love working, but it's just due to my neurological mental, my Aspiness, my Asperger's can be more difficult, right? So that is where we are now to be involved with, So today, and I'm not that I'm getting better at understanding social unwritten social rules, social dynamics. It's for many years. I struggle, but from now on, if you're 18 plus for that play, friends with benefits only, black, white, or rainbow. But my only stress now is financial, and of course, I predicted what's happening now in 2019. So I always have to make that point of reference, because when you enter the realm of geopolitics with me or with any other Aspie who has this special interest, which is geopolitics, you have to understand that also I spend hours and hours a day analyzing, revising, going back in history, analyzing the patterns, analyzing the events, analyzing the histories, the regions, for example, major wars, major trade pacts, major trade dealings, major organizations, major institutions, or minor or in between institutions, right? Because it's not necessarily only the big ones have sometimes the medium size and the smaller size can have a regional impact as well, right? For example, OPEC, right? OPEC, oil and petroleum exporting countries, has pretty much a power, has been very influential in world markets and world finance and world business as a whole, and even, of course, on the global economy, right? Due to the fact that it's the price of oil influences, it might influence how we what we pay at the grocery stores, and of course, we're expecting tomorrow for Montreal, and across Canada for gas to reach $2. Now, I said that is it possible to see $3 by April 7th? Well, it's highly likely that we will see $3 gas or gas record prices at the pump. I don't drive myself, and if I would drive a car, it will be electric. However, back to what I was discussing. And again, this is an introduction to my theory, my geopolitical analysis from a North American perspective. And of course, you know that dancing is my favorite sport, and I love sport and fitness. I love working out, training, exercising. I've been on a fitness journey. I encourage all to do so. I've been actually calling for the mass financing thereof. You can read my past transcripts over the past days, over the past months, over the past years. I've pretty much been the constant with my theories and ideas in parallel to what I predicted in October 2019. But of course, when I was discussing this back in October 2019, I guess if somebody would watch my videos, it wasn't taken that seriously because no, it's not gonna happen, blah blah. And then COVID hit, and then a few years later, Russia began a conflict with Ukraine, or Russia invaded Ukraine, what Russia calls a military special operation, which is the biggest conflict war in Europe since the end of the Second World War, right? In 70 years, in more than 70 years, Europe has not seen a war just as as it's happening now, still, right? So my analysis, or the major motive, common denominator, the motive why I have of as the main motive, the primary motive why I had predicted, or of my prediction that we will go towards an international conflagration, aka World War III in 2019, was the fact that many nation states, many civilizations did not fully resolve their conflicts from the 20th century. And even if you look at the Iranian conflict, it's really a 20th century Cold War era conflict in many ways, because the current Iranian regime took power 11th of February 1979, right? So they've been in power for more than 47 years. Now, of course, the assassination of the Ayatollah Khomeini, and it's important to note that, interestingly enough, in 1989, or when the first Ayatollah Khomeini was actually, I learned more about the conflict, that supposedly was one of the largest gatherings in history, the funeral of Khomeini, and the largest public funeral ever for a leader in modern history. Think about that. Millions and millions and millions of Iranians mourned for this leader in 1989. Interesting, eh? So you have to consider that. So that means that still there's, although in January there's been riots and unrest and against the regime, which was under sanctions for many decades, but somehow maybe this attack had the countering effect of mobilizing the population to support the regime even more than they had before, right? And we have to also understand more their philosophies. It's unique, eh? It's a unique Islamic theocratic republic in terms that they're Shia 12ers. They're Shia 12ers. So as much as I'm not an expert on that, know a little bit about it. But of course, it is to be accounted for, because it's quote unquote a republic, but it's more like a theocracy, like a militarized theocracy in many ways, or something. It's unique, right? The regime is unique in Iran, that was established in 1979. But if you are to look at it, because from myself as a North American, fundamentally, as much as I know world history and geography and geo, it's geopolitics 24/7 in the Dragon's Lair, parallel with dancing being my favorite sport, and rock and roll, and I rock and roll 24/7, and it's I love gridiron football as well, especially to look at the statistics and what have you. But this is how I can integrate it from a North America's perspective and how we can view it from what has been happening recently, it is like a fumble recovery, right? And because Iran was successfully blocked the Strait of Hormuz, making that the price of gas skyrocket, and now they're with the Houthis having joined the war. It seems that they're going to be able to block the other side as well by Bar Strait. So it's like the twins, right? The twin straits, the twin passageways that control not only oil and gas shipments, ships, but also fertilizer, which will affect the price of food. Price of food and growing food will be a problem for many countries, right? Because it's dependent on a certain fertilizer, which passes through those a big percentage of the fertilizer needed for many countries, especially in Africa, some in Asia, but predominantly there. In many ways, just like the United States imports a lot of potash, right, from the prairies, mainly Saskatchewan, and that produces lots of potash for used as a fertilizer here in Canada, right? With I think 85, 90% of the potash that the United States imports comes from Canada. So for U.S. farming, right? So it is like a fumble recovery in many ways. So and much of it has to do with that. I'm gonna say base 44 or Eagle base Eagle 44, and that would be like a major player, right? And that would be the player who caused this fumble by a big tackle. Let's say the United States with Israel were the one who was running, or I guess well, it could be a pass interception as well in many ways. Although the bombardments from above have been successful, so it's a bit of both, a bit of both, right? A pass interception also, but not necessarily. It's more a running, like a running, but it's, although there's no boots on the ground, right? There's still there's no boots on the ground yet, but nonetheless, that analogy can be referred in both ways as a either an interception for gaining yards thereafter. The defensive player of the opposite team in football paradoxically becomes an offensive player, right? The paradox. There's a paradox there. There's a adjacent paradox to this event in football, whether it's a pass interception, because the defensive player, if it intercepts, he runs to gain some yards, even scoring a touchdown. Sometimes it goes all the way to score a touchdown when you have a pass interception, right? A pass interception can mean a point, can convert into a touchdown, can become a touchdown. A fumble can also become paradoxically a touchdown, although it's the defensive player who now takes on the offensive. So that base 44 was built as a defensive strategy, but now it also has the offensive capabilities. So that base 44 and the other bases and Iranian strategy is many ways parallel to this event that can happen in football, in North American football, pass interception or a fumble recovery to gain yards in the adjacent territory, right? To gain yards in the adjacent territory. So that is how it's happening on the ground, right? So this is how it's happening on the ground above as well. But the bombardments can be that the fact that the Iranian missiles are unfortunately piercing the Iron Dome in Israel, right? I'm gonna have to bring back to life Genesis chapter 33, Genesis protocol, Genesis chapter 33, based on those biblical verses of the twins Jacob and Esau, and we're gonna have to update it with the current events, and we're gonna have to see how we can implement that protocol for what's happening now, because that protocol and ideas and theories were launched by yours truly before October 7, 2023. I launched them before October 7, 2023. Genesis chapter 33. It was protocols and initiatives and geopolitical strategies, which I discussed in the past years ago before October 7, 2023. So now I'm going to have to, in the coming days, weeks, in the coming days and weeks, to update it and upgrade it and present a reform relation of my theories and my strategies, which of course I am calling mainly for their implementation across the North American collective, but the NATO complex as well. So this is the introduction. We're going to discuss it more, but it is Iran causing a sort of a fumble, and due to that base 44, which we're going to consider as a major player in the team, whose efforts to even gain territory adjacently In this case, it will be over United States allies, which are Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, right? And that has been a major problem in, in this area of this new conflict, which has begun February 28th. So that has to be understood properly. So this is the fumble recovery theory, or the fumble recovery geopolitical theory, and the I'm going to present in the next when I go more in depth about the strategies to what we can do next if there's no official resolution, because it seems that now the fumble recovery is going towards gaining yards and territory adjacently.